after our last talk about reasoning, resonance, intuition versus rational or hyper-rational thinking, as well as, emotional reasoning and things like that, we decided that maybe it would be a good idea to open up the topic of divination and really open up not just discussing what divination is or what divination is for, but also helping people to employ exercises for not only building their own psychic skills, but talk about some safety tips, developing a sound practice, pitfalls, and just what an overall healthy application and mindset is so that you can level up beyond the basics. I do feel that this will also be very helpful for those of you that are just getting started into this practice, whether you are getting into the tarot, numerology, astrology, the runes, scrying, it doesn't matter. When it comes to psychic development and divination, we're going to cover as much as we can in this talk right here and now. Why and what for are we doing divination anyway?
Well, I mean, that is a great question, and the answer is purely subjective.
And I think that if you ask 20 different spiritual practitioners, then you're probably going to get maybe eight answers, between them, because you're right, it is totally subjective. Now, for me, it's all about basically engaging psychic development. Divination is the practice of employing tools and exercises to engage the psychic senses and to gain information. It's exercise, it's training, it's working a muscle. And because again, as we talked about in our last chat, the tool is not necessarily the power, but you do want to find a tool that resonates with you. But it's all about developing your ability to gain clarity, gain insight, and to, of course, develop even deeper spiritual skills and abilities. Of course, we use divination to look into the future as far as trends, tropes, patterns, probability, and outcomes. We look and see what something is made of. We put something under a microscope to see what a certain situation or a certain assignment or a certain foci is doing or how it's growing. And we can, of course, glean information from that as well. But what's also happening, and what's more important about what is happening, is that you are training yourself, the mind, the energy fields, and the intuitive and psychic faculties that you have. We're going to come back to those terms in a second, to be able to function in a higher capacity. Because once you get that down, your other skills turn on. That's how divination has been employed for eons. Because people who are working with the cards or reading palms or reading crystals or studying astrology, if they are doing it in a way where they are not deferring power onto the tool, right, giving all the power to the astrology, giving all the power to the cards, giving all the power to the runes, they are developing their psychic senses and creating a much more intimate relationship and embodiment opportunity with their higher self and their higher consciousness. And that, to me, is why we do divination.
My entire association with divination has been one of seeking, sought after, and being. And as I heard you say that, those channels you spoke of, that increased awareness that comes, the heightened senses that are activated through the practice, you touched upon those channels within me, and it makes perfect sense to conceive of this as training, no different than going to the gym and exercising your physical body.
Right.
Yes, divination will hone your psychic abilities, and I'll repeat what I said before. When you're drawn to practices that you most highly resonate with, you will be at your peak capabilities. So basically, my attraction to the tarot is based on the visual aspect. in terms of divinatory practice, I'm really drawn to things that invoke a clairvoyant visual state, things
Mm.
that touch upon the aspects of the subconscious through the visual spectrum. And so the tarot is the most obvious choice for me. And I find that the visual state resonates the greatest with me. And what I kind of failed to mention in the previous podcast regarding resonance is that when you're in that resonant alignment, when when your state of being is in its pure authenticity, you are at your peak capability. So whatever it is you're capable of in terms of, in this case, divinatory practice, you will be at your maximum potential if you are engaged in a practice that resonates with you. And so for me, I find the visual process involved in the tarot is most suitable. And yes, I engage in a daily practice, and that involves you, Nico, because after I get my 24-hour card, and that also, reminds me too, the 24-hour card, it's basically a question, and that's the key when it comes to divination to me. You're also one that really drives this point home when it comes to working with spiritual practice in general. What is your question? What questions do you have? Because if you lack the proper question, how can you possibly utilize a tool that the which its entire basis is upon a particular intentive question?
Right.
So the 24-hour tarot card for me is I literally ask the universe for the 24-hour etheric, interpersonal weather report, and I draw that and it's money every time. It's batting 1,000. It has not failed me once. I look at the picture, and the picture touches upon the various intrapsychic uh, composition of my mind. It hits the archetypes, it hits past experiences, it hits conceptual models, everything.
Because when you are working with a tool or a practice or an exercise that does really engage you and engage all of your senses at once or all of your psychic faculties, the rest turn on. When you find out what works for you, the rest that works for you becomes available. So it might start with tarot or runes, but all of a sudden you might notice, oh, hey, I've got some telepathy going on over here. Or, in my case, it was once a more latent and unpredictable and chaotic mediumship ability that became more consistent and started to click stronger and stronger and stronger. And that precipitated, astral travel and remote viewing, and that precipitated this. And so it's about expanding your world by opening up all that you are. It's because I do approach the magical arts and my spiritual practice as a martial art. I work it in a way to work everything else. And you will notice that. When you practice, when you work with something, your other abilities get stronger. A lot of people will often ask, and I've gotten comments even recently on YouTube, I'm waiting for my guides to show up. I'm waiting for my spiritual abilities to turn on. I've went and paid for activations. I went on this retreat in, this town over here. I went to it's you have to be able to practice. You don't go to the gym just so you can lift heavier weights at the gym. Naturally, you would be going to the gym to get into shape so that you could perform better elsewhere in your life, right? You might be training to run, you might be training to climb, you might be getting in better physical shape to prolong your lifespan. You might be doing work in order to give yourself enhanced mobility or performance, wherever that performance is going to be. But it's about doing the work.
Well, I would say that personally, my engagement with divination has been a bit of the inverse, but with the same destination. So, for example, when you brought up the physical training metaphor, personally, when I first engaged in rigorous physical training, it was to look better and become more physically attractive, and do all the peacocking, associations with that. However, through that practice, I became stronger, more fit. My body was healthier. My immune system improved. And I did, as you said, my performance in physical activities drastically improved. And that's really kind of how I've gone about divination. I've gone divination for me is seeking what I want and need to know. And in the beginning, it was always what I want to know. I want to know. I want insight into this. I want insight into that. I want to understand this. I want to understand that. And over time, it's shifted into okay, what is it I need to know? What is it I'm lacking or missing that I can attain through this practice? And so, regardless of that inverse nature of the relationship, my performance has, as you said, it's become enhanced. So again, it's just a difference of motivation. The impression I'm getting from you is maybe you have been, at least earlier on, engaged in this to enhance your performance and abilities.
Oh,
And
absolutely. I was going to say, do not think for a second that 14-year-old Nico was as mature as he is now. Of course, I would do it for, let's just say, something a bit more personally or inwardly focused as well. Mine was to find out things, to have powers, to have, to be able to get information. Of course, when you start out, there's a lot of the mundane application, right? The sort of pragmatic as it is assumed to the ego that is motivating it. I mean, when you think about that, that is kind of how a lot of people come into their spiritual path and practice. Before the awakening craze, a lot of people were coming into this because either they had abilities that were already on that they had no control of, and that was also a motivation for me, or they ended up in a situation where they wanted to develop some kind of power that would enhance their quality of life on the physical in more mundane everyday life, whether it was looking sexier or it was giving them an opportunity to, maybe transcend some kind of limitation or glass ceilings that they had experienced, or, healing has been a pretty commonplace example of that, right? A lot, especially in recent years, a lot of people have been so fixated on their spirituality being about overcoming a wound in recent history. But even that needs to be transcended. And it does get transcended. When I first started, I wasn't really trying to look more attractive with divination because a lot of divination can require sitting rather still. But I was certainly looking to become smarter, to become better informed, and I was looking for advantages. Of course, you're going to feel better about yourself when you feel smarter or you feel more attractive. There's probably something that you're trying to do in the mundane with those looks or with those smarts, right?
well, I think what you're touching upon is okay, the extent to which the motivations for your divinatory practice serve you and what dangers they present to you as you pursue them along that path. And that's
Yes.
what's just sticking with me. Like what were the dangers you encountered through that motivation to attain power and improve and increase your abilities?
No, that there are quite a few, and I think that when it comes to developing sort of a healthy application and mindset, I think it's okay to own what you're doing something for, as long as you're not letting the more ego-driven motivations rule. And I remember who I was when I was 14. I was very unhappy. And you do feel pretty powerless when you're 14. And there really isn't a whole lot of, you don't have any money. Your life, your potential is for a lot of time, for a lot of it is dictated by the choices of, or the outcomes or the experiences of your environment. How's your school performing? What are the choices your parents are making? What are the choices that you have available to you in your town? What's your socioeconomic situation? And I could not let that be, of course, something that I carried into adulthood, but it did motivate me to get started, at least with a more formal practice as opposed to being kind of more of a chaotic wild power that I was before. I think that growing out of it is going to be crucial, because also, if you don't grow out of it, you may not ever find the tool that works for you. You might only look for something that someone else deems as optimal. You may take an overly strategic approach to how you go about your spiritual path and practice. You may only look to what's mainstream, right? You may never pick up runes, even though runes could really serve you, because tarot and astrology and oracle are the mainstream ones, and so everyone better be an astrologer or a tarot reader. And there's a need to pay attention. Okay, what is informing my assessment of these things? Because finding what works for you does require time and patience and discipline. And if your motivation for your spiritual path or practice is a sense of urgency, desperation, or a feeling of lack, a desire for healing, or a desire to gain power, it's a very finite fuel for long
This is
motivation.
not a compensatory practice. Divination is not a compensatory practice. It's a complementary practice.
Absolutely.
It can be a challenge to really understand what resonates with you in terms of the practice, what you figuring out what you want and this kind of thing.
Hmm.
And it might be helpful to, as a framework, a utilizing framework, to really tap into what's calling you. What is calling you forward? What's moving, urging, pushing you to engage? And,
Yes.
and that calling is just coming from yourself, your higher self. But listen to that inner voice that calls you to guide you if you really don't know where you want to begin with this. And if you heed the call, it will reveal itself to you, and then the resources to engage in the practice will become available. And next thing you know, you're doing your daily, weekly, monthly readings, or whatever else you're doing. You're doing your astral projecting. You're doing your astrology work. I love numerology. I mean, numerology was one of those things that called to me. I pay attention to the numbers, and I structure my existence in a way that's aligned with the numbers. And again, it's all about finding what is it you want and are most capable, and that's going to be your best practice.
The best thing you can do is experiment. And I've experimented with a lot, and I'm sure you have. I've experimented with scrying, looking into mirrors, looking into crystal balls, looking into flat crystals, looking into water. I have read the runes, and I did that for quite a while, but they weren't necessarily tools for divination as far as I was concerned. They focused it a bit more into my magical practice, my spiritual practice, and ceremonies. But runes and I just never really clicked for divination. I do love them, but it's just that's just not the application I have them for. The I Ching, while I am fascinated by it, was never really something that engaged me, and I never engaged it. And so it's just not how I got my mojo going. And at the end of the day, it is about what's finding, what's getting your mojo going.
Again, is it resonating with you? Does it touch upon authentic being?
That
It can't be emphasized enough. I don't mean to interrupt you, but it really can't be emphasized enough that the tools you work with in divinatory practice are just that. They are tools, nothing less, nothing more.
right.
And you empower or depower these tools. So the tarot card, yes, it's nothing but a piece of paper, a small little piece of paper with a picture on it.
If you are looking into getting into divination, the first thing that you may want to do is also learn how to handle your own energy. How do you, what is your maintenance? What is your practice? How often do you clear your fields, right? Clearing your fields, whether it's a spiritual bath, salt bath, or, are you maybe smudging? Are you toning? Are you working with different sound frequencies? Rob was talking about putting on the 432 hertz solfeggio tones, just to kind of help clear his space before we got on the call. Are you meditating? Do you know how to meditate? If meditating doesn't work for you in a stationary way, active meditation, kinetic meditation can also be helpful. Any kind of spiritual practice, you need to know how to engage and stay engaged without letting your mind, your thoughts, and your emotions pull you this way and that. But you want to make sure that you are capable of holding your own. And that can also be developed with practice. And that's also something to think about. If you have been at this for, off and on, and you don't know if you're developing, what's your practice look like? Any skill, you have to, anything that, well, it's not even a skill. Let's take it back. Anything that you want to grow and prosper, you have got to make up your mind to nurture it and dedicate it, right? You are going to say, look, I am going to set aside time for this. Like the weightlifter, if their dedication is to their work, it's like, all right, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to have to, I want to make time to go to the gym. So does that mean staying up an hour later and going to the gym at night and waking up an hour later? Maybe it's waking up an hour earlier because I can't miss work. Maybe it's looking at how I'm dividing my time and my focus. Now, conversely, if you have been beating your head against the wall, say you're really, really trying hard to do the runes, and it's like, look, I make it a point to pull a rune every day. I make it a point to look at the runes once a week, and I give myself a weekly reading or whatever. But I'm getting into the zone, and I'm doing it, and I'm recording it, I'm logging it, right, which is important. Make sure you journal in the beginning. I'm paying attention to what's going on, but it's just not clicking. Okay, move on to something else.
Or maybe it's time to take a break. That's okay too. If you're beating your head against the wall in the scrying and the astral projection, it's okay. You can step away for a moment and revisit when you're at the proper place personally to really engage it in a way to progress it.
And give yourself permission to experiment with other forms. Give yourself
experiment. Exactly.
Give
Like
yourself,
you said, playing and experimenting is not willy-nilly. I mean, it's
right.
Playing with it, it's experimenting with it.
Right. It's about a healthy practice, and it's about commitment.
Check your assumptions. Check everything, question everything before you walk down this path. And that's pretty much all I got, Nico.
That's all he's got. Well, guys, I want to make sure that we can, of course, honor Rob's time. And I thank you again for coming for another chat. This I want to come back to very, very soon. I actually would like to request from Rob that our next episode also be about the topic of divination. Because
I agree. I mean, there's so many subsets. I mean, we covered the broad general sense, but I mean, we could
this
pick
felt like
this
an
thing
orientation.
apart. Yeah, this was absolutely an orientation, and there's so many subsets to focus on that we could spend an hour on plus hours on each. So I think it's important to do that because this is something this has such broad spectrum application.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much available to everybody that there's just we can bring so much more to the table than what we just kind of generally covered.
Oh, of course. And we were racing through it. So we will be back. Okay. Y'all just hold on and we will be back because this is definitely, well, I might even just call this divination orientation. We haven't even gotten to school yet. So with that, I think we're going to wrap up for the night. Thank you all again for your love and support. If you enjoyed this talk, please share, subscribe, leave a comment in the down bar below. Engagement, of course, helps this out a lot. Any kind of engagement, whether you have any questions, suggestions, all engagement. And you know what? I'll be on the lookout for it, and so will Rob. So if you want to, share your thoughts and, ask some questions, might even help come up with an idea for how to answer it in a episode sometime.
Oh yeah, the more you contribute to the comments, the more ideas and input we get, the better we are able to produce.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So we're gonna love you and leave y'all. Thank you again so much. Thank you again, Rob, for this chat today. And again, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. As I always say, we appreciate it. And we'll see you all again real soon.
Stay peaceful.